Welcome to Bright Light News, everybody. We're happy to have here today Tom Marrazo. Tom Marrazo is somebody who went from relative obscurity in the fight for regaining our freedoms to being thrust right into the spotlight, being interviewed by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Great Britain News, Alexa Lebois from Rebel News. He is also a person who had his bank assets frozen because he was part of the convoy as a liaison, speaking for the convoy, telling it the world that the convoy was actually going to pull out, working with the police. He's a military veteran. Thank you so much, Tom, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Well, we just talked about the fact that you came from relative obscurity. You just mentioned before we started this that you were part of some chat groups, but not really too involved in the movement of trying to win back our freedoms in an active way, out in the forefront, out in the public eye. But you became thrust into that role. Can you tell us, first of all, why you went to the convoy up there in Ottawa?
Well, just like everybody else, I was glued to social media, to like following the convoy. And I wanted to be out onto the highway and, show my support, wave to the convoy as it was driving by. And I had some friends that were involved with trying to help the truckers take a rest for the night, park on his land, and that kind of thing. And so they passed through my area, and then really 2 days later, I received a phone call from somebody who was involved in that piece of it in my local area, and they said, "Hey, we know you're a ex-military officer. Would you be willing and able to come to Ottawa to help out with some of the logistics?" And literally from that phone call, probably 3 hours later, I was standing in Ottawa in the Arc Hotel in the conference room with a whole bunch of truckers and some Ottawa police. Literally, that became the eye of the storm for my life for the next 22 days. And it started literally the moment I walked through the door.
It's fascinating. You went from, like we said, relative obscurity to all of a sudden being the face representing the convoy to say that they're going to be pulling out of Ottawa.
We have chosen to peacefully withdraw from the streets of Ottawa.
I mean, that was big news.
Yeah.
Worldwide attention on that. Again, your involvement, just to take us through the steps to how that day came to pass.
Yeah, so I arrived, and I was brought into a conference room. And like I said, there was truckers, there was Ottawa police, and immediately the police told me to give me my name and turn off my phone. I thought, all right, that's a little bit bizarre. And I just listened in on the meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I remember one of the truckers, the meeting was concluded. And one of the truckers said, "Okay, before everyone goes," he pointed at me, he goes, "I want to hear what he has to say." And my first thought was, well, where am I sleeping tonight? Kind of thing, right? I really didn't have. I was in the room for minutes, not hours. And so I spent the next probably 2 to 3 days just assessing the entire situation, trying to get a handle on, in military terms, what's the intelligence picture of the battlefield? If I use military terms, it's not because I'm a militant person. It's just a language that I'm accustomed to, and I think your viewers will understand that. But I have to be careful in choosing my words because the mainstream media assassins like to parse my words and create a horrendous picture that's not based on reality and definitely not truth. So very quickly, because in my military career, that is something that, the truck convoy is something that would have taken us months and months and months to plan and then execute. And I often use the analogy that, we deployed to the field. We had an army, we deployed to the field, and we didn't know how many trucks we had, or we didn't know how many soldiers we had. We didn't know who our platoon commanders were, our sergeants were, what vehicles we had, what capabilities. We just literally deployed to the field, and we didn't know anything about ourselves. so it was very difficult. So we had to spend a quite amount of time trying to figure out even how many trucks we had, because we had large convoys, but we also had a lot of ones and twos, independent owner operators that showed up and attached to the convoy, which was great. We loved that. The other issue is a lot of the truckers came with a group from their province, but once they arrived into Ottawa, got completely separated and were in all different areas. And so we spent a lot of time in the beginning trying to assess how many trucks we had, where everybody was, and then establish I don't want to say a chain of command, but some sort of a mechanism for, fewer individuals speaking for larger groups, so that we could get coordinated, we could pass messages. It was exceedingly challenging to achieve that.
Do you have an idea of how many trucks there were?
One of the guys, Mike, had gone out one night, and I believe through the night he counted 322 just in the core. So that included Wellington and all the side streets. So that was 322 in the city, but we also had Coventry, the Parkway, out in different locations like Elmer and stuff. So we had trucks on the outskirts of the city, but in the city itself, we were roughly about 322. But again, that number kind of flexed like an accordion. You had trucks that would have to go back home, and then you had new convoys coming into the city. I think Randy Hillier brought in a group one day on a weekend. So the number itself was always fluctuating.
Right.
And so from really the first week, I spent a lot of time just trying to do two things: figure out what our status was, and then really I had to figure out who the alpha males were. And I don't mean that from an aggressive point of view, but I wasn't signing people's paychecks. Nobody had any obligation to listen to what I said, but they did. And I think that they saw that I had a very calm demeanor. So from a military perspective, that would be the minimum expectation. And so I think I was very grounded in my approach. And that really resonated with a lot of the truckers. And they listened to me. And I gave advice. My goal was to really advise and try to make the best decisions that I could possibly make, or give the best advice, and in hope that people would follow where I was trying to point. And I was surrounded by some really incredible people, and they would always say, "I'm praying for you," and I would always say, "Please pray for wisdom and good decision making," and so that I could give good advice to the truckers on what I thought the next steps were. Second to that, I was spending a lot of time with the Ottawa Police, in constant communication with the Ottawa Police, and that proved it to be very challenging as well. So that first week really was to try to build relationships, identify who the true leaders were, who could get things done, communicate with the police, and then stabilize everything. And just then I wanted to transition onto like a continuous logistical operations. So why I say that is because my role from day one continuously evolved day after day after day. And then, a week to the day that I arrived, the Ottawa Police had raided Coventry. And that was the first time that anybody had ever, seen me on a camera. And I actually had a joke that first week that I said that, if when the history book is written about this convoy, if my name never appears in the book, that's a win for me. I'm here for Canada. I'm not here for me. And unfortunately, when they raided Coventry, I ended up doing an on-scene interview with Laura Lynn. And then we arrived back at our headquarters, and the group collectively said, "We're doing a live stream." And they said, "Tom, you're doing the live stream." And that was the first time I had participated in any of that, the media stuff. And there were several of us. There was Dr. Alexander Hodgkinson. Jeff was one of the other people I was working with closely every day. And so the four of us. spoke that first night about what had happened at Coventry.
Right, and just for
And
context, for people that don't know, Coventry Road was where there were a massive amount of trucks that were stationed, parked there. People were living there. There were food tents,
Yep.
heating tents for people. And the police came in that night in heavy riot gear. They came with, I believe, tear gun canisters, whatnot, for these peaceful truckers. And
they got like 5 jerry cans and a 3,500 liter tank of colored diesel, which does not go into a transport truck.
Yeah. And so anyway, I took that night. I don't know if anyone else realized it at the time. I certainly didn't, but that seemed to be my media tryout. And then over the next couple of days, I had done some more deliberate media statements where I had prepared what I wanted to say. And instead of just really thrust into it, I took my time and I put my thoughts on paper. And I did more prepared media statements. And, that seemed to resonate with people. And there was a short time where it was probably about 5 days or so where I didn't appear on camera or anything like that. I was busy working on many other important things. And which was fine for me because I only wanted to speak when I had something important to say or there was a requirement. But there was other people that were easily able to fulfill that role. And I have to say, like, Tamara Lich is a fantastic spokesperson. Every time she did some of the press stuff, I thought she was incredible. Very calm, nerves of steel on the outside. I'm sure terror on the inside, which is often what I felt as well. But there was a lot of spokespeople. It's just that I just looked different. I presented differently than others, and that kind of created a future appetite for me to do it. But as we proceeded towards the end, I did the 2 press conferences on the final days because in reality, I was the last one that wasn't incarcerated. So that was a situation where I made the decision that I would give the statement because I was really the last one standing that the public were accustomed to seeing.
There has never been violence in the 3 weeks that I have been here. The police brought the violence. To that end, as a movement, we have chosen to peacefully withdraw from the streets of Ottawa. There is nothing to be gained by being brutalized by police.
I think Tamara Lich would have been the perfect person to go up and to deliver that statement or that message. But as you know, she was already incarcerated for 2 days. So I just basically used my own initiative and I said, okay, we need to tell the public what's going on to stop the rumors, respect all our supporters and let them know that we are leaving and why. And so I did prepare a statement, and it's one of the hardest moments in my life. It felt more like a eulogy than it did maybe a public service address type of a thing.
right, I mean, that was 3 weeks of incredible positivity, love, and unity between people who would never have shaken hands, let alone hugged before. I mean, you had truckers hugging with elderly Canadian citizens, thanking them, sharing their stories of pain and how they needed them to stay.
Like what you're watching? Then help us bring you more. Please click on the donation link in the text description.
And I think a lot of people felt that there was the wind was definitely knocked out of a lot of people's sails to hear that was happening, but it obviously was logistically the best way to go considering the violence that had taken place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, speaking of Tamara Lich and some other people within the convoy, there are rumors that they may have been planted. They may have led the convoy into a situation where the Emergencies Act could be invoked. They were possibly controlled opposition. There's murky pasts. Can you speak to that about Tamara Lich, please?
Yeah, well, I would vehemently deny that accusation about anyone that was in my circle. I never, not once did I spot anybody who indicated any sort of a nefarious intent of any kind. And, in terms of Tamara, I was impressed by her more often than most of the other people, because of her intellect, her calmness, she's ferocious, fearless, and she did spend, I believe it was 18 days she spent in incarceration. So the idea that Tamara would be, anything other than genuine is, in my opinion, false. It's almost absurd, and I'm disappointed that there are those types of rumors that are floating around about her. She was there for her kids, for her grandchildren, for Canadians, and I talked to her, our lawyers. It was our team of lawyers that we had in Ottawa the entire time. They were, beside me always. And one of our lawyers, Eva Chipiuk, she talked to Tamara every single day on the phone while she was being incarcerated. So for somebody to be, controlled opposition, excuse me, or anything like that, they don't go into incarceration for 18 days. So, and they don't have a televised or a broadcasted bail hearing where they're denied bail, for the public to see, or finally a final bail hearing, again, where the public saw. You don't line up that type of a dog and pony show for somebody who's controlled opposition, right? And, I had spent a lot of time with Tamara and her husband. Her sister was there. And never once did I ever suspect that somebody had a bad intent, ever.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the convoy, for you, what do you think the convoy accomplished?
Well, the obvious answer is that, did we end the mandates? No. Did people lose their jobs in political positions? Yes, they did. There was a lot of secondary effects that had happened. The number one mission that we had, which was to end the federal mandates, we didn't accomplish that, but we put enough pressure on a lot of people that there was change that was affected. Now, oftentimes the convoy gets credit for ending provincial mandates and sort of that kind of a thing, but I'm a little bit more suspicious of that line of thinking in terms of, the motivations of the provinces to end a lot of their mandates. Like if you look at BC, they went more strict. Bonnie Henry was doubling down when other people were opening up. And you can just kind of look at it objectively and say, well, these provincial governments are taking certain actions, but really, if you just step back a little, you realize what they're doing is they're passing the buck to the federal government and then making it look like they're giving back people their privileges, which, by the way, they don't have the right to they don't have the legal grounds to take away rights and replace them with privileges. But that's the language that they got accustomed to using. I mean, I've seen premiers say, we'll give you back privileges. Which is disturbing when you think that an elected official would conduct himself like a prison warden,
Right.
as opposed to being an elected representative that was put there by people. And
Do you
so
think these provincial
Sure.
Mandates would have been transferred to the federal level if it weren't for the convoy?
I do in some cases, because if you look at Ontario, we're heading into a June 2nd election.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Doug Ford cannot afford to lock people down, impose stricter, harsher things like he likes to brag about, and then expect to be reelected. Right?
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a carrot and stick thing with Doug Ford. And I think one of the other provinces are getting ready to go into an election cycle soon as well.
Yeah.
We saw federally with the Conservatives, they got rid of Aaron O'Toole. Now they have a leadership contest on the go. We lost the city of Ottawa went through 2 police chiefs before the third guy stepped up and was fully willing to violate people's charter rights. So really, when you look at overall the sum total, did we get what we wanted? No, but we got other additional things in the fact that We woke Canadians up when Justin Trudeau decided to attack his own citizens, when he decided to openly attack his own veterans on the very steps of the National War Memorial. You know, if you think about that, the disgrace to that, the federal government has become the laughingstock of the entire free world. And even the third world nations are looking at Canada laughing.
Right.
And this is, so our reputation as Canadian citizens actually increased, where our federal government's reputation on the global scale has decreased dramatically.
100%. The only people who were unlawful in Ottawa
Were the
were
police.
the police.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And so, you know, that was one thing. I think that woke up a lot of people, a lot of Canadian citizens. And I've had people say to me, listen, my 80-year-old grandmother watched you, Tom, on a YouTube video on that last day. And she started changing her tune. And I know several people were doing alternative media or social media. People were waking up because they were outraged by what this government was doing to its own citizens, right in its nation capital, right at the foot of the National War Memorial to veterans. And not only that, but then they started to violate our due process. The biggest thing that woke people up was the government's willingness to use this FinTrack system to attack our financial assets with zero due process. I never had a warrant. I was never charged. I've never been convicted. And none of the other people, the 200,000 plus Canadians that had their assets frozen, none of these people were ever charged. There was never any criminal activity against or investigations against them. So when you look at that, Canadians started to realize, oh my God, I could be investigated by my own government for donating to a cause that I believe in. Like, do I live in Canada or do I live in a communist country now?
Yeah, and there's some important points here that we need to go back on, is the fact that, you know, you put it very well in one of the press conferences and had said that, you know, basically the government deputized the banks. They became the judge, jury, and hangman without an actual trial to freeze these accounts. And we're also looking now at people who did have their accounts frozen to be permanently marked on their files. I mean, we are living in a situation that I don't think a lot of people realize, that this is what you call tyranny, right? When you can create an enemy of the state because they are standing up for their freedoms, and freedom becomes a dirty word.
Yeah, and you know, it's really interesting to me. I met this this wonderful man on Saturday when I was in Toronto. He lived most of his life under communist rule when the USSR was still a big superpower, a global superpower throughout Eastern Europe. And he said to me in very broken English, he said to me, Canada is much worse than what they lived under with the Russians. And he said, because this government in Canada convinces you that you're free, but acts in the opposite manner. He said when the Russians under communism, they just said, you're not free, and if you don't get in line, we're going to take action against you. You're basically going to be walled. But in this country, it's confusing because they say you're free, but then they actually act like a communist country. And he says it's much more insidious the way they do it here. And I've spoken to a lot of Eastern European people. I have really good friends that are from Poland that have actually immigrated from, or they fled Poland in the 80s to come to Canada. And they're now looking to go back to Poland and flee Canada. This is disturbing. And if Canadians are on the fence, ordinary Canadians are not sure which way to go, then I suggest that they seek out somebody who came from Eastern Europe, talk to them about what it was like to live in communism, and then start waking up and paying attention.
I think that's a great point. It really is phenomenal, the psychological operation that was done on the population to be hoodwinked into believing that this is freedom, that, you know, people who are demanding to have the right to work, to travel, to decide what goes in their body, where they can enter, that fighting for those freedoms is actually selfish. I mean, it's incredible, the snow job that has been done on people, right? And, and so with that being said, we have now gone to this extreme where this psyop, if you will, has gone so far that we're seeing mask mandates being lifted, where people before would promote the masks and say, yes, you know what, public health is saying it, the science is there. Now, the snow job is so powerful and effective that when the mask mandates are being lifted, these people are still arguing for the masks.
Yeah.
Right? It's incredible, the fear mongering that's happened. And they're now saying, listen, we want these mask mandates back in. They're being irresponsible. They're going against the public health mandates.
If you find this content valuable, click the donation link in the text description. We need your help to bring you more.
So it's incredible what's happened to the population.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. Let's get to the root of the matter in this problem. Education in this country is shameful. And a lot of the people that you're describing, the fighters that are fighting to keep the masks, are the very educators that spend 7 hours a day with our children. I heard a story I read the other day. There's an 18-year-old student at a high school here in Ontario who was suspended until tomorrow because he refused to wear the mask when the mask mandate was lifted. So, you know, if we look at our education system, it is going completely woke. It's going in that direction at a very fierce velocity. And I'm going to stop using the term critical thinking, because we have turned the term critical thinking literally into a catchphrase. It is meaningless now. We should start talking about deductive reasoning. You know, actually make decisions based on your personal deductions. We need to teach students how to tell the difference between a rumor or social media and a fact. You know, not, I heard, Tom, that you and Gord were talking. It's like, okay, you say you heard that we were talking, but did you actually see Gord and I talking? Well, no. Well, where did you hear it? Well, I don't remember. And this is passed off as fact. And this is the problem. If you look at the masks, anybody who has ever looked at the mask, one, most of the masks on the box actually say, they won't stop the spread of a virus. Two, a virus is 3 microns. The pores inside the masks that everybody are running around with are 60 microns. That's like kicking a fly through a field goal. And yet, these masks are known to cause upper respiratory illness, hypoxia, mouth sores, and a whole host of other related illnesses, not to mention that I've heard reports of people passing out because they're not getting enough oxygen. And so, you know, when you hear people supporting science and then refuting science over the same exact issue, and it's coming out of our educators, it makes you really look at it and say, who's teaching my children? I know I was a teacher. I taught software at Georgian College for 2 years. I loved it. But I also taught an artificial intelligence course on ethics, like the ethics of using AI. And you would be surprised the lack of global or big picture thinking that people have, because they get very myopic in what it is they're trying to study, and they don't consider what the bigger implications are.
I would agree with that 100%. I think our education system teaches students what to think, but not how to think, to critically break down something and then, you know, objectively look at it. Is this working? Is this beneficial? Is it damaging? And how do we change it? That's the biggest thing. Are we actually teaching problem solving, right?
Yeah.
And
but if you come out and actually state that, if you you actually apply what you had just said, those principles of true, honest, critical, or deductive thinking, and you come up with a different conclusion that is of what's popular or what's being pushed, you're now called a nut job, a conspiracy theorist, an anti this and anti that. And now we're adding racist. You're a racist, right, to the argument.
Yeah, and let's extend out what you just said about the education system, about how there is no thought, there is no actual backing up with facts. Let's put that to Ottawa. The fact that apparently the siege that happened there, the insurrection with Ottawa citizens being terrorized, one question would have obliterated all of that media coverage and political talk with just the question, where is the footage? Where is the proof? We didn't have any of our citizens asking this, and they just went along and bought this narrative, right?
Yes.
It's a plague, definitely.
Yeah, I would agree. And then if you take it even one more level further, you got to look at the role of the mainstream mercenary media. What's frustrating for me in terms of the mainstream media is that taxpayers fund the mainstream media. We paid, we pay approximately $1 billion a year to the biggest propaganda machine known to the Canadian public.
Right.
I find it ironic that a lot of the CBC, CTV viewers, they know the media lies to them, but they refuse to take action against the lies. And they believe somebody who they actually deep down know is lying to them. It's a very bizarre form of Stockholm syndrome that we have with our own media. And it's frustrating to see the constant barrage of lies. And I'm happy to say that I met some mainstream media personalities that have now lost their jobs with their own media outlets. One is Heather Prosack from out west. Anita Rashana is another one. Yeah, sorry. Yes, Krishna. And some others, I think Kid Carson. These are people that want to be journalists, want to be telling Canadians the truth. And their crime is telling the truth, and therefore now they're unemployed. But I think their outlets did us a favor, because now all the three people that I just mentioned, they're starting podcasts. So now they're unencumbered by their media outlets to tell the lies. However, there is the legislation coming out wanting to basically kill alternative media, right? This is scary. This is absolutely frightening that this is being even considered, or it was an issue that was even raised in the House of Parliament, when you consider that we have a charter guaranteed right, the freedom of speech.
Right, and that comes through Bill C-11, which is Michael Bice, professor from Ottawa, has spoken about it, and he says the implications of this jurisdictional overreach are of treating all audiovisual content as, quote, a program subject to CRTC regulation. Basically, anything you put up there will be now regulated, will be scrutinized, and maybe shut down from being voiced, right?
Yeah.
A perfect point is that exactly what you said. The media is supposed to be the government watchdog. Instead, it's turned into the lapdog, right? Yeah. And one fantastic thing that I'm seeing here is that Dr. Julie Ponesse, I believe in concert with Ezra Levant, Candace Malcolm from True North Center, they are actually hosting a 3-day workshop to promote independent journalism. They're looking for 21 to 30-year-old. They will fly people in who are selected to learn how to become independent journalists. It's something that's so important in our society now, because as we know, it's a Goliath, the mainstream media, right?
Yes, it is a Goliath. And you have to wonder how these people have sold their souls and knowingly told the lies that they're telling with a straight face when they entered that industry to tell stories, to tell real stories, not fictional stories. If that's what they want, they should have gone to Hollywood or to Toronto for movies. But they chose journalism, and their job is to report stories, not create them.
Right.
And I find they focus on the latter instead of the former. And that's really terrifying.
Well, I think this is the new Hollywood North, isn't it? Our mainstream media?
It is. Well, actually, we're, absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned one of the legacies of the convoy up in Ottawa, that being that a lot of people woke up to what the government was doing. It no longer became about the mandates. It became about, what is our prime minister doing? He is trampling on our rights and freedoms, become a laughing stock for having this incredible police overreach where peaceful citizens were unlawfully brutalized. And now we see, where he's going with the new coalition he's created with the NDP, with Jagmeet Singh.
We're now facing the greatest threat to our freedoms that we've ever known. Please, Help power the truth. Click the donation link in the text description.
What else? Is there anything else that you can add to the legacy of the convoy in terms of how people continue that legacy?
Yeah, before I get into that, I want to say one thing. And I've spoken at a couple of events recently, and I've spoken about specifically about police. And this is something that is, I think, vitally important. Not all police officers are the same. There are many, and I would say they are the very small minority of police officers all across this country right now that join the police honestly and sincerely to serve their communities because they wanted to help people. They want to protect people. And the ones that showed up in Ottawa that did what they did, I have no clue what their motivation is, and it defies everything about the training that they've ever taken. And yet they were still willing to brutalize Canadian citizens in our nation's capital. They brutalized veterans wearing their headdress and their medals. And they didn't have a problem with it. And for me, I hope that each and one of those law enforcement officers or police in Ottawa think long and hard about ever again attending a Veterans Day memorial. I really think that for them to show up after what they did to veterans is a disgrace. So, that's really disappointing. But we have to, as a society, figure out a way to realize that not all police are the same. And a lot of police officers actually refused the call to come to Ottawa because there was a choice. And a lot of them said, no, I'm going to call in sick. I'm going to take a day off work. And some people said, well, then they should have resigned. And I disagree with that fundamentally for the fact that if all of the good officers resign, what are we going to be left with? Psychopaths? And so I want them to fight for us on the inside and then start rising the ranks and start changing the culture of their police departments. We need them more than we need the thugs that we got in Ottawa. So why I kind of went down that road with you is because this shows another area of fundamental loss of confidence in the public. Even people that weren't there and watched what the police did don't look at police in this country anymore the same way. So this was another byproduct of what Singh and Trudeau did to Canadians. And that is incredibly frustrating for many, many people that didn't even have an involvement in the convoy. It broke a lot of hearts. It broke mine. I mean, you saw, I was, I would say, unusually emotional on the last press conference I did. And I had a lot of different emotions, a lot of different memories and thoughts and feelings about what went on all the entire time versus what I was seeing that day. And a lot of Canadians have come to me and expressed that same sorrow because Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau broke the hearts of Canadians. No matter how much what you support, these two men, I think almost more so Singh, broke a lot of hearts. You expected Justin Trudeau to do stuff like this because of all of his other rhetoric. But when Singh joined that coalition and he gave Justin Trudeau in Ottawa during those votes, when he gave him a majority, which he's been doing for months, they just fessed up to it yesterday. I think he broke a lot of backs in this country. And the number of people I know that are still telling me, I don't think I'm going to be living in this country within the month. Canadians are leaving en masse.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're seeing what should have been an opposition party become a cheerleading party so that they can save their own political careers. Yeah, and I think it's a great point you brought up. Canadian public had their heart broken, but I noticed a lot of veterans, ex-police officers like yourself, like Danny Bulford, like Vincent Gerses, walking around with heavier hearts than people who actually witnessed that brutality, who were shocked, were heartbroken, fearful, right? You guys walked around with hanging your heads low. There was a deeper sense of, this is not what what our veterans and our police officers are supposed to be standing up for. I mean, the police oath is based on the Constitution, and these rights that we know have been trampled over these last 2 years. So going on to the legacy of the convoy, what is it that you think that people can do to continue that legacy, to keep that fire burning, to restore the freedoms that we have had taken away from us?
Yeah. So we touched on a few different areas, and from my perspective, and I spoke about this in my speech on Saturday at Nathan Phillips Square. I really believe, myself included, absolutely myself, we have to accept a small measure of responsibility for getting to this point in our history. As citizens, we casted our ballots, and then we abdicated our duties and responsibilities to our society in terms of the control that we gave to politicians in this country. And I think there's a couple of factors that contributed to that. One, education. Again, we don't teach education. And there's a great video with Premier Brian Peckford and Jordan Peterson where he talks about this, that we don't teach civil liberties. We don't teach politics. And I don't mean the drama of politics. I mean the actual mechanisms of politics. We don't teach that to our students. If you want to learn about politics, you either get involved with a party at a young age, or you wait till you enroll in a political science degree program in university. And that's the only time you get the fundamental understandings of government and politics. And so I think that that is a fundamental flaw in the way we are raising our youth in this country.
Some would say flaw, and some would say that this is an intentional omission from the education system.
Yes,
right?
and so this was my next point, is that because of that situation, and we've become very apathetic to politics, we criticize it, we're very cynical. We cast our ballot and then we walk away unless it's to criticize. But here's the thing, we've also been taken advantage of. So to your point, it does seem deliberate. I do believe it's deliberate. But that entire situation created fertile ground for us to be taken advantage of. We took our eye off the ball. Well, people realized, hey, they're not watching. Let's start doing stuff to the public that we otherwise wouldn't be allowed to do if the public was actually engaged in our activities. And so for me, I'm guilty of it. Okay. I'm not a lawyer, but I've gotten a crash course on the Canadian politics, the Canadian government, the Charter of Rights, the Constitution, different laws. I talk to lawyers now every single day. They're my new best friends. Actually, I really do like the two that I talk to every day. They're phenomenal people, and I'm very proud to know them. But the reason is they educate me, but they are also freedom fighters. They're constitutional lawyers, and they went into constitutional law to make sure that the government was always in check. And a lot of people don't understand, we always hear about the charter. You can't take Tim Hortons to court because they violated your charter rights. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this country is meant to protect the Canadian citizen against the government at every level.
Right.
And it's important because citizens don't know that. And when police go through their training, their entire training around the legal apparatus is meant to ensure that police officers never violate charter rights, right? Because a police officer is an agent of the government. And so my next step for me is I'm going to live by what I just said to you. I'm going to live by those words. And I have decided that I am going to run in the next provincial election with the Ontario Party in the Peterborough-Kawartha area under Derek Sloan. Now, Derek Sloan didn't start the party, but he is now the leader. He was voted in as the leader of the party. I think it is the party that most head and shoulders above the rest aligns with my values and what I want for Canadians, what I want for freedom, what I would want my children to inherit.
Tell us what some of the pillars of the platform are for the Ontario Party.
Well, there's a lot of stuff on the actual webpage. Family, faith, freedom. And you can go on there and they have a whole section about education. And the coming days, there's going to be more of the platform that will be released to the public. We're actually looking at more potential candidates. We're hoping to get upwards of 70 candidates into the field. And what we're not going to do is we're not going to settle for quantity. We're looking for quality people that are freedom fighters and understand the situation that we're in, and understand and can easily recognize what tyranny is in the state of Ontario today. And a lot of people said, well, why didn't you go federally? Why aren't you getting involved in your municipality? I believe my assessment is that the provincial level politics is the best place that I can lend all of my experience to right now. And there's no federal election, but what happens in Ontario has an effect at the federal level of what the federal outcome is, because I believe Ontario has 14 million people reside in Ontario out of a population of 38 million. So federal elections usually boil down to what the impact of Ontario is, just based on population in voters. And so I think if we can influence Ontario, maybe in the future we have a federal influence based on a new return to our old values that Canadians once actually cherished and have somehow been derailed and have moved away from their own value systems. So anyway, go ahead. You had a question.
Well, I was going to say, you're putting the walk in the talk, right? You went up to the convoy. You mentioned that people need to step up now and become active participants in their community, investigate, rethink what they're being told to create the change, because we have been lulled into this, I would say, a complacent, apathetic state, because in Canada, we do live in such a great country where we can afford to have these former freedoms, but also the luxuries, the basics of life, where people aren't struggling. And it's not something that's thrust into our face where we need to call the government for the accountability. So it's great to see that you are walking the talk and going ahead and doing that.
You made a statement I was relatively obscure, which is true. And this is an important point for me on a personal level, and I've said this many times publicly, the truckers actually gave me a voice, because even as a soldier, I didn't know what direction to go. I couldn't identify really the capabilities of my adversary. And when I was asked to come to Ottawa, I recognized that opportunity as being paramount. It was the opportunity for 2 years I've been looking for. So they gave me that opportunity. They gave me that voice.
That call to duty.
The call of duty. And I know maybe it sounds cliche because it's associated with a video game, but it really is a call of duty. And the best way that I can honor the opportunity that truck convoy and all of its supporters gave me was to continue the fight from inside the political spectrum. Now, it took me a week to decide whether I was really going to do it or not, because I thought, am I going to be more useful doing activism, or am I going to be more useful doing politics? And I realized when I made the decision, it was because I realized if I join politics and I am elected, I can do both. But if I don't do politics, all I have left to me is activism. And what we've all seen over decades is that when people protest, the politicians just close the curtains and they go on about their day and they just ignore you. And so by joining inside the system and fighting, I can't be ignored. And here's the other thing I'm going to say. If I am elected, I'm not doing all the heavy lifting. I am going to confront the constituents who elect me and make them stay involved, make them stay engaged with me. This is a journey we're going to take together. It's not going to be, I'm going to cast my ballot for Tom and he's going to do all the heavy lifting. We got into this mess because of that kind of a mentality where we trusted people in power, in authority, and we were betrayed. And so I'm not going to accept that people are simply going to vote for me and abdicate their civic responsibility to me, they're coming with me on this fight. And I know this sounds funny, but I want to raise an army, and I don't mean a combat army. I want to raise an army of citizens that need and recognize that we have to take control of politics. We don't have to win back our country. This country is already ours. You know, all walks of life. This is a melting pot. I believe in it to be a melting pot. I'm proud of the fact that Canada truly is a melting pot. But it's not that we've lost Canada, because Canada is still ours. But what we have lost is complete control of the political apparatus that makes too many decisions on our lives. And that's what we have to do as an entire constituency, not just one man being elected to do all the heavy lifting.
Well, Tom, I think that's a great point that you bring up. We are in this situation because people have abdicated their own personal power and allowed the government officials to run amok
Yes.
and create this situation where we have now had our rights trampled. As you said, the Constitution, the Charter of Rights, those were not created to protect the government from the citizens. It was created to protect the citizens from government.
Yes.
And it's very encouraging to see that out of this trucker convoy comes a new politician, somebody who's working together.
I'm a public servant. I will be a public servant. I will never be a politician. I don't have it in me. I'm not conniving enough. I don't lie enough. You know, I will be a public servant.
I'm glad you make that distinction so that you will be accountable to your constituents, representing your constituents, something that we have not seen in the last 2 years.
I think a little longer than that, my friend.
Yeah, we could definitely argue that. Definitely argue that for sure. Listen, I want to thank you so much for spending the time to share your thoughts with us, your experience, and then this fantastic news that you will be working to fight for the freedoms of all Canadians, especially here in Ontario. And we wish you all the success going forward.
Can I'd like to give a two shout outs if I may.
100%.
There's a really good friend of mine. We worked together in 1996. We did a course together. His name is James Top. He's walking across Canada. He's a retired military veteran.
Hello everyone, we're just outside of Monarch, Alberta. It's north of here on Highway 3A.
He has served this country for a total of 28 years. He's been deployed to Bosnia. He's been deployed to Afghanistan and I believe Macedonia. He has given everything for this country. And he retired from the Canadian military recently and he had a job for the RCMP. And he's a reservist now. And because of these federal vaccine mandates, he was now put on unpaid leave and he's now being 5F'd, kicked out of the Canadian military because he will not partake in this medical experiment. And so myself and another group of veterans have started an organization called veteransforfreedom.ca. And we are now talking to James Top. I talk to him regularly and our whole team has been talking to him. We are going to start supporting his march across Canada. So in BC, he started at the Terry Fox statue. He's about to enter into Alberta. He's walked over 800 kilometers. He's now, I believe, on day 32. And he will arrive at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Ottawa in the middle to late June. And what we're asking for is veterans to help us support James's walk in every location. So he's doing an average between 20 and 40 kilometers marching per day. And so he's got, the communities are supporting him, donations. And so we as an organization have made James our top priority in an effort to support him on his march across Canada, to get to Ottawa and start having conversations with the elected members of parliament, get these mandates ended once and for all.
It's incredible what he's doing.
Yes.
James Top and Veterans for Freedom, freedoms.ca is the organization. And we can find out more about James there.
Yes, so we're going to create a whole new a new page on our website, just everything about James. And I think we're going to call it From the Top. And it's going to be everything about James and his team that are actually walking on the ground right now.
Amazing. So thank you again, Tom Marrazo. We appreciate everything you've done for the Fight for Canadians, and we again wish you the best in your newfound public serving career.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for the interview. It was great, as always.
Our pleasure. Thank you.